So, good morning or good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from today. We are so glad you are here. Welcome to the July session of our CPS HR webinar series brought to you by your trusted partner in public sector HR. Today, we're diving into an internal pay equity and its evolving landscape, presented by CPS HR technical specialist Igor Shegelev. We've got an exciting session ahead, but before we jump in, here are a few quick housekeeping notes as usual. Today's webinar is being recorded and you will receive an email tomorrow with the link to watch the replay, so be on the lookout for that. You will also find the recording and slide deck on our CPS HR webinar page later this afternoon. We do need some time to upload the video and the slide deck, so just be patient, but it will be up and running this afternoon. Everyone is in listen-only mode to help keep our audio crystal clear. We encourage you to use the chat to connect and share ideas throughout the session. And if you have any questions for our speaker, you may drop them anytime into the Q&A box, and we'll answer as many as we can at the end. And you can access that Q&A box at the bottom of your screen right here. Now, without further delay, I'm going to hand it over to Igor. Igor, take it away.
Thank you, Maritza. We're going to present the topic of evolving landscape of fair pay. And we're pretty much talking about equal pay and legislation, advancing fair and compliant compensation practices. And the quote today is, "Without data, you're just another person with an opinion," by Edward Deming. You may ask why we call this evolving landscape of fair pay, and is it just to have this catchy title? And we talk about pay equity all the time, and it's been topic for decades. So what has changed in 2025? The progress has been slow and uneven, but there was progress, especially last couple of years. So what changed was this is no longer just a conversation. We're talking about context, pressure points, and of course, accountability mechanism. We'll go right there. What has changed specifically? Well, first of all, data transparency. Some states actually enacted their own legislation on data transparency and pay transparency, and it's no longer optional in some of those states like California, Colorado. They have to disclose pay ranges when they open the job. Now, the other development is Equal Employment Opportunity Commission actually may soon revive the component 2 of pay data reporting when they added gender specifically to the breakdown and data report. At least there was an intent from EEOC, and they planning on doing this. The other important development is now investors, when they invested in private companies, of course, they use the ESG is environmental, social, and governance metrics that they review when they decide whether company is eligible for their investment. And equal pay actually become one of the metrics of ESG under social and governance, and actually under environmental, because it does affect employee morale and liability of the employer. The big change is, of course, technology. If we, at some point, we had to rely heavily on professional services and consultants, now with AI tools, you actually do pay equity on your own. I mean, you have to know what you're doing and you have to be careful with this. But AI calculates standard deviations and statistical significance values and correlations very quickly, very easy. And HR departments actually are able to explain the gaps in pay or assumed inequities very easily using ChatGPT or any other AI platform. And of course, workers' compensation, especially newer generations, they expect fair and transparent pay. They are willing to leave their employer. At least now, the unemployment is so low, and employees, the studies show, really do want to see transparent pay, no secrecy in pay, and so on and so forth. And litigation. Uh, it always was a subject. It always was under scrutiny. Equal pay is an important thing because we think it's the right thing to do, but there's also a federal mandate and, of course, state laws and regulation and local acts. And we'll go through this real quick. So our objectives today is understanding key principles of pay equity, review legal landscape and compliance requirements, learn how to analyze pay equity using data, and the HR departments can do that effectively now, explore corrective actions and communication strategies. So let's talk about the gender pay gap by decade. Let's examine. So this is what we see, actually. The improvements are made, but we're still not there. You can see that in 1990s and 2000, the 75, the females were making 75 cents on every dollar male makes, and it improved in 2020, but there's still gap. What is important is that, and I'm going to repeat this over and over throughout this presentation, that we can explain these gaps. And if we can't explain them, we need to do something about it. The key statistics actually include what are the earnings by categories, like wage earnings categories. The pay gap in the low wage, as you can see, is smaller percentage-wise than for those in high wages. You can see that high wage, 90th percentile of earners, the $50.52 of women on average against 65.26 of male average. Another metric would be what is the gap by education? And we also see here that the high school diploma has, while it has 20% gap between gender pay, the higher the education, the wider the gap. You can see that college degree and advanced degree actually goes to almost 30% and over 30% gap between male and female. So let's examine legal environment first. Federal law, state and local legislation, explain and understand substantially similar work, because it is critical that we understand what's the mechanism, how the law is working, what they actually compare and scrutinize, and affirmative defenses. So affirmative defenses essentially mean that you don't have to pay the same, because there could be some objective factors like seniority, like experience, and so on and so forth. But we have to know what they are and how we consistently apply them. Today, aside from federal Equal Pay Act of 1963, which is amendment to FLSA of 1938, and this, by the way, one of the first anti-discrimination acts was a year before 1964 Title VII of Civil Rights Act, enacted by Congress. Aside from there, or in addition to that, every state actually enacted, well, 48 states enacted their own legislations. And some of those legislations stronger, some of those weaker, but everybody has that. And the legal environment is, again, that was one of the first anti-discriminatory act. I mean, we after that you see 1964 Title VII of Civil Rights Act. There was 1967 Age Discrimination in Employment Act. Then there was 1970 Equal Employment. Then was 1971, and so on and so forth. But those were first act. Equal Pay Act got stronger with Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act of 2009 that added some provisions and actually eliminate or make it more difficult to claim statute of limitations on pay. And of course, state and local taxes added the liability. We are going to discuss latest legal developments. You can see, you would think that, hey, not going to happen with us, but take a look at this. Google, just now, I mean, it's not decades ago, it just happened 2 months ago. Google settled for 28 million on equal pay for equal work lawsuit. And they did not meet default, but they did settle. Apple still pending, and of course Disney and MasterCard. You can see that those companies, they do have resources. They can actually have a good hire good professional staff, professional services, consultants for that matter, and yet somehow they cannot get a good handle on equal pay within the organization. Let's review the act. Excuse me. Equal pay for substantially similar work, regardless of gender, race, or other protected characteristics. So equal pay for equal work under similar working conditions. Now, we have to identify and correct unjustified pay disparities. So it doesn't have to be equal all the time, but it has to be explained why it's not. Substantially similar jobs means that it moved from pay equity review of the same job or employees within the same job classification to similar jobs. So the lawsuits we saw and studied were, let's say you have professor of chemistry and professor of literature. I mean, who said what is more important? Those are different jobs, different job classifications, but they're substantially similar. You can see probably network administrator or network developer or network analyst and network security analyst. The jobs overlap, they could be considered similar jobs. Some of those actually assigned to different pay grades, and it doesn't matter. We'll actually explain to you how to deal with this if you have those jobs that are assigned to different levels, different pay grades, and different ranges, yet considered to be substantially similar. And of course, defining this substantial is very important to understand how you can apply those affirmative defenses. Act prohibits discriminating in wage assignments based on gender. We already established that. Seeking wage rate history now, requiring disclosure. Relying on prior wage rate to determine wage rate for new employees. Like no longer you really, it's a good idea to ask, how much are you making now? And if the job candidate tells you $50,000, you would think that you can offer 55 and that would be enough. But this is not how it should work anymore. You should really understand the value of the job, the value of the employee, and compare it internally with internal equity and create some kind of systematic approach to wage assignment. And of course, retaliation is prohibited for any anti-discrimination acts, including Equal Pay Act. You also cannot retaliate for inquiring about, disclosing, even discussing employees' wage rate anymore. How do we understand substantially similar work? It's not the job title alone, as we established. It's the law actually says that job content and body of work that involves the same skill or requires the same skill, same effort, responsibility, and conducted the work performed under similar working conditions. But components of pay equity are very broad. I mean, first of all, it could be job equity, like how do we compare jobs? Why one job is considered to be having higher value versus another job? What's the separation between supervisor and subordinate, for that matter? How we can make sure that we don't establish pay compression or pay dispersion. And the compression actually can lead to inequity in the future. So, of course, individual pay equity, relationship between workers' pay in jobs that are substantially similar. Pay secrecy is practices that restrict workers disclose their pay. Pay transparency, that now you have to actually display or publish the wages, especially in some states. And again, we're talking about affirmative defenses. We'll go deeper in that in this slide here. The law suggests that equal pay for equal work under similar working condition can be defended by affirmative defense, such as seniority. So if you have two employees, different demographics, and one makes more, another makes less, you can explain it, well, it's a seniority. The one that been here longer makes more, and that is our policy. Also merit. Somebody has better performance. So, and we pay for performance. Again, should be the part of your policy. Quantity or quality of work, that easy to measure. Geography, and then some geography actually is added in some of the state laws. And then it says in federal law, it says, as in state and local, differential factor other than sex. And what it means is that we cannot predict everything. We cannot name every single situation where actually gap in pay can be warranted. Such as, for example, one person works night and receives shift differential, another person works on the roof, and that's environmental factor. So those factors can be selected objectively, but it cannot be sex. So you cannot use sex against sex discrimination as affirmative defense, of course. So criteria is broader. You can use job experience. Again, if this is your policy and or guidelines, and you establish that and you apply it consistently, or you can use performance pay. Again, measure of quantity quality. And some organizations want to consider themselves learning organizations, and they think that higher education above the minimum qualification do add value to the job. Of course, skill levels like certifications. Imagine your wastewater operators that get Department of Environmental Quality level 4 certification, which is difficult to get, which requires a lot of study and provides knowledge. And of course, this can be higher skill level. So conducting pay equity audit can be easy if you, again, you have to know what you're doing, you have to use the right tools, and you can now use either help of professional services, consultants, or AI. And we're going to go over this in this next set of next portion of our presentation set of slides. What we want to discuss is first identify causes of inequities, and of course key metrics. How do you do that? What is the process, and how would you use AI in this process? How would you employ the AI capabilities to help you to determine, identify, and then correct pay inequities and pay gaps? Let's start with red flags that you can see in pay equity. Excuse me. Again, unexplained pay gaps. When you see them, you have to mention it. You have to work with human resources department. You have to try to identify what's the reason for pay gap in this situation. What is the criteria that we use? And if those disparities become pattern, they're consistent, then you need to address them immediately. Some of it because of informal pay settings. When you don't have consistent systematic approach to setting salaries, then you will set salaries for different employees with using different mindset or different criteria. And of course, vague job descriptions or inconsistent pay structures, ambiguous pay policies. All this can actually contribute to inequities. So let's think how we conduct pay equity audit. What should we do? What should we know? And before I go there, are there any questions, Maritza? Because we're moving to the next stage. I wanted to make sure that we answer any questions about
No
previous
questions at
portion.
this time.
Okay, so I'll continue. Collect compensation and demographic data. That's, of course, the first step, and you have to collect data, salaries, pay structures, pay grades, maybe start date, job description, understand what was the difference between jobs, and so on and so forth. Once you have the data that you're going to need for pay equity audit, you have to define comparator groups. What are your control groups? What are you trying to accomplish? Do you want to see the gaps in gender only, or you want to add multivariate regression, like you add gender and race and color and national origin, age. So you have to also break those groups by, and that's the first step usually, break those groups by EEOC. That's an easy way to do that, and organize EEOC categories. Like those are crafts or professionals or executives and so forth. And then again, identify what are your controls. So let's say that we use gender and pay. Those are two variables. And select compensation driver. In order to understand, to explain the gap, there should be some kind of measurement mechanism. Like, how do we set salaries? How do we decide that one accountant makes more and is placed in 60th percentile of the range versus the other is placed at 25th percentile or at the minimum of the range? The most commonly used, I'm going to ask question. I don't expect answer. It's difficult to do interactive session here, but I just want to make sure I know that you all know the answer, but we need to reiterate this. So what is the most commonly used compensation driver or criteria in United States? And according to World, I'm going to wait just a couple of seconds so you think about that. And the most commonly used compensation factor that determines wages is experience directly related to the job. So we're saying, if you did this before, and if you did at the same level of complexity and the same level of authority, then you can do it again. It is assumption, but that's the best we can do when we hire somebody. And we say, okay, let's say that we hiring at this point accounting supervisor, and we ask question, and our driver we decide is experience directly related to the job. And what does it mean? So and you have somebody who was accountant for 20 years, and you say, okay, have you been a supervisor? Because we see that you understand accounting for 20 years, you're an expert. So you have the same level of complexity for this job, but did you perform this job at the same level of authority? Meaning, did you actually make decisions for the entire team, for the entire group? Did you supervise? Did you lead project? Did you plan it? Did you create strategic vision? And if not, then it's not directly related experience. And you still can use it because it does add value to the job. But compensation driver is critical to understand what are we measuring against? What are we doing here? And of course, once you know that, once you establish that, you perform statistical analysis. We're going to talk a little bit about statistical analysis and how you interpret it in the next few slides. We go into metrics and tools specific to pay equity audits. Marisa, any questions so far?
No questions at this time.
Okay, thank you. So what are the metrics? So first of all, we need to know what's the average pay, what's the pay range for the job. In order to understand where employee belongs within that range, we need to know what the range was, the spread, bandwidth from minimum to maximum. And we need to know what is employee's salary. Is employee at the midpoint or at the 75th percentile? And there are different metrics for that. There's compa ratio or wage penetration ratio, and that they pretty much doing the same thing, just measuring it differently. And then, of course, we have to do standard to identify and calculate standard deviation, and then coefficient of variation, which is what standard deviation is. It shows you the range, the spread from the mean of salaries from the mean. Then you have a choice. You do regression analysis. You can also look at correlation. Correlation is the relationship, as you know, between two factors or two variables. In this case, for example, you have a driver, and driver is experience directly related to the job. But for simplicity, let's select different driver. Let's select seniority as a driver. So the date when you started. And the other variable is your salary. So how they correlate? Is it always that somebody who has more years with the organization makes higher salary? If yes, your correlation will get close to 1, which is absolute correlation. If it goes down to 0, there's no correlation. If it goes down to minus, there's opposite correlation, meaning somebody with more experience and more years with the organization actually makes less. And of course, you want to create some kind of visualization tools to see it and to explain it if needed, to communicate it to other employees. Let's talk about standard deviation here. So essentially, standard deviation helps to understand how much salaries vary within a group. If you see the image on the right, and if you can imagine that there's arrows that scattered all around bullseye, what it means is that the standard deviation is low. It's tight pay distribution. It's very close to the center, creates central tendency. Now imagine that those arrows go all around. I mean, they're not even close to bullseye. And that means high standard deviation. It tells us there is a wide spread in pay in the same job or in similar jobs. And by the way, maybe this is the good way to mention that if you have to calculate standard deviation based on jobs that similar but assigned to different pay grades, and that would be my question, how would you calculate it? Because they're in different pay grade, different range. So what do you do? And of course, I'm going to wait a few seconds for you to think about this. And the answer is you cannot use salary. I mean, imagine that salary of $20 in pay or $25 in a pay grade that has minimum 20, maximum 30 is 50th percentile. But in a higher pay grade, it would be 40th percentile. So it makes no sense. You cannot compare apples and oranges. So what do you do in this case? In this case, we recommend that you use compa ratio. And you compare not the salaries, but compa ratio. So somebody with compa ratio of, let's say, 1, which is, excuse me, 1 means in compa ratio metric means that you're right in the middle. you're right in the midpoint of your pay range. So somebody in the lower pay grade will have exact same comp ratio with somebody with higher pay grade if they're in the middle of pay grade range. So, well, but the other question you may ask is it bad that there's high standard deviation? It's spread so much, it's so wide, and or is it better when standard deviation is low or tight? And the answer is, there's no good answer. That it doesn't. High standard deviation just says that the salaries are spread. Now, we need to just understand why they're spread, and if we can explain it, then you're in a good shape. So the goal isn't always to make standard deviation as small as possible. The goal is to make sure that variation can be explained. And in some cases, small standard deviation is appropriate when jobs is very simple, repetitive. There's not there's not a big variation in body of knowledge required for the job or in skill for that matter. You have simple repetitive jobs, which is less and less number of those in US economy anymore. We moving very heavily into knowledge-based labor, knowledge-based jobs, but they still exist. And in this case, yes, smaller standard deviation, probably better idea because, if there's no need for broad distribution, broad spread of knowledge, why standard deviation, why pay should be so much separate or so much scattered? And of course, wider standard deviation appropriate for professional, scientific, maybe some artistic or executive jobs, planning, engineering, and so on and so forth, IT. So those jobs require broad knowledge base and maybe broad level of accountability. You can have a manager in finance be responsible for budget of 10 million versus another one for 50 million. So here's the next step. Once we know standard deviation, and we run it for all EEO group or for a certain cluster of jobs that we consider similar or substantially similar. What the next step is to understand if that standard deviation actually the wide just because of the fluke or random variation. So is it random? Like imagine that you toss a coin just once to make a final decision, and it's nothing but chance, and chance is 50-50. This is not how we set the salaries. We don't toss coins, but imagine that you toss coin 1,000 times. You can probably see the pattern, and it is important that we use statistical significance to understand if standard deviation actually valid. If that gap is, imagine that, just an example, you have 10 employees within the same job. 9 of them are males, 1 of them are female, is female. Is this a valid representative? This is valid sample. It is not. There's only 1 female, and maybe we need to broaden our sample. So how would we know that standard deviation is valid? Usually by conducting t-test or regression analysis. Again, it was not something HR departments were engaged in before the age of AI. Now, you just upload it to AI, it can actually do this as long as you understand how those numbers generated, what are you doing? And in order to understand we just need to do a little research. and compare the difference between groups, average against standard deviation and sample size, and know that the result, which is p-value, we're calculating p-value here to understand that this standard deviation has statistical significance. It should be below 0.05. In other words, basically, it's we're saying that there is less than 5% chance that gap within pay happened by chance. It's a pattern. Now, when we know it's a pattern, let's take a look at that pattern visually. So this chart here represents female and male pay in different EEOC categories, as you can see. And you can see we broke it to professional, craft workers, technicians, administrative support, and so on and so forth. And the vertical lines there you see at the top show standard deviations, show how wide it is or narrow it is. You can see like laborers and helpers in female category have very narrow standard deviation. So when we see this way, it's easier to identify what is the group we want to look at. And of course, that will tell us the further steps that we need to take. We already discussed that, but essentially you have two jobs that are substantially similar. One is in higher and one is in lower pay grade. And the salaries or wages will not create a good equal picture. And in this case, again, we calculate standard deviation off of compa ratio. So we can say, well, this person is male and this person is female, or this is one demographic versus another demographic. And this person has compa ratio of 1 versus the other person has compa ratio of 1.1. It doesn't matter the salary, but what is important that the second person is higher within the range with their salary is higher within that given range. And if the compensation driver that you select show you that there shouldn't be a gap, then you have to move the first person to compa ratio 1.1. There still will be gap in salaries because they're in different pay grades. But now they will be in the right position and you will achieve the equity. Now, the use of compa ratio will require another metric. And in this case, the healthy controlled range in many organizations would be 0.05 to 0.1. Within that range, if compa ratio if standard deviation falls within that range, then you have a statistically significant valid data, valid results. We just want to, in the end, want to discuss and focus on three areas to establish fair and equitable pay distribution. And those areas are first, and this is your foundation, sound, consistent, effective pay policy, which would include pay structure design, systematic pay administration, consistent application of calculating and establishing employee promotional or demotional or hiring ranges and so on and so forth. So let's say, just an example, that you have a pay structure that has pay grade separation of 5% between each pay grade. And the bandwidth or the spread of the range is, just an example, 50%. And you establish that anybody with 7 years of directly related experience should be at the 50th percentile of that range. Well, that's a system now. And then it's easy for you to establish some kind of wage progression line to say, what about somebody with 4 years of experience? What about somebody with 3 years of experience? And if you know exactly where they fall within the range and you consistently apply it for both internal staff and external job candidates, then you have better chances to establish, to develop equitable and consistent pay administration. Of course, the next one is user objective and defendable measure criteria. And the third one, use of well-designed audit mechanism. How do you go back? How do you look at it? What are the tools that you use to identify whether gaps are explainable or not? And then, of course, the best practices are, again, select your affirmative defense and your compensation driver and stay with it and be consistent. If you pay for seniority, then you pay for seniority. Then you bring everybody to the minimum. Now, can you do that nowadays? It's very difficult in this competitive labor market to hire skilled, very well established employee with a high intrinsic value, individual value in the labor market. Like somebody with 20 years of experience in accounting, and you bring them to minimum of your range, you really risk either to get denial or to not be able to retain this employee. Adjust unjustified pay gaps when you see them and when you know that they cannot be warranted. You have to bring them to equilibrium somehow to your system. Improve pay decision documentation. Record it, explain why, and document what's your rationale. Of course, job descriptions, job classifications, and policies are extremely important. Again, this is foundation of your pay administration. And of course, training to managers. So you all on the same page. You understand how you determine wages, why you determine wages. Our experience was working with different diverse clientele was that the flawless communication is just as important as design and execution. If you can create the best system and using the best tool, but if employees don't understand that and managers don't support it, it would be very difficult for you to achieve employee satisfaction and high retention ratios. And of course, disclose salary ranges. Secrecy no longer really accepted in the labor market. Standardize pay offers, communicate your policies, and constantly monitor your pay equity. That's our presentation. Any questions for us?
Thank you, Igor. We do have one question, and we will get to that shortly. But let me wrap it up real quick before we get into the questions. So thank you, Igor, for such a fantastic presentation. Let me turn my video on here. Thank you, Igor. I'm sure everybody was able to take something away and will use it in their organization starting today. So before we get into that question, and if anyone has any questions, please use the Q&A feature and we will get to them shortly. So yes, this session was recorded and you'll receive an email tomorrow with the link to the recording and the slides. And you can always find it on our website at www.cpshr.us. I will also post a link in the chat right now. The recording and slide deck are not available yet, but please check back this afternoon and they should be uploaded. There's that for you. At CPS HR Consulting, we are proud to support public sector agencies with services like recruitment, training, test rental, classification and compensation, compliance, and so much, much more. If you're looking for strategic or HR support, we are here to help. And finally, we'd really appreciate it if you could complete the short survey that will pop up at the end of the session here. Your feedback helps us make future webinars even better. So thank you again to our presenter, Igor, and thank you to all of you for spending time with us today. Be sure to join us on August 20th for our webinar on writing that works, and we hope to see you there. Igor, this question was asked while you were talking about standard deviation. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, it's from Jeff. He said, given that the size of organization varies, some sample sizes may not be large enough to be statistically significant. In those instances, what approach is recommended when conducting a pay equity audit?
Mhm. Sure, it's a very good question. Yeah, typically you have a small sample. You cannot really, those statistical techniques not going to tell you much. But because the sample is small, you can actually review it manually and apply a compensation driver. So let's say, and we had this situation just recently. We had the client that had five incumbents in software developer job classification. And it's small, again, small sample, and there was only one female and four males. So we just did manually reviewed what is the driver. And if the driver is experience related to the job, we wanted to know based on their resumes or their application form, how much experience they have, which may include, if you decide, your organization decide, include external experience. And we found that there was one person who was just hired, male, who was at the highest pay of this group of five. And some of them been with the organization for 10 years. So reviewing that person application form, we realized that this person has the most experience. And this is, again, how you explain the gap. And the organization decided that because experience is our compensation driver, we will give this person preference and bring him higher within the range, give him higher wage penetration. Now, if the policy was seniority, then this employee would be the lowest paid. And if not the case, then we would say this gap cannot be explained, and you have to bring this group to equity. Either reduce the pay of that employee who is above, or increase the pay of other employees who should be at or above this employee's wage. And of course, there are many different options that you can pursue. But answering your question again, small group, you can do it manually.
Thanks, Igor. Jeff, hopefully that answers your question. We have one more here from Melissa. She said, substantially similar work is very subjective. So how do you recommend we define this?
This is where human resources expertise come into play. So the law is very broad about this. They say similar skills, similar effort, similar skill, effort, responsibility performed under similar working conditions. You really have to do, in some cases, job analysis. And some of it, and this is what we do, we study jobs in human resources, and some of it can be easy, some of it can be cumbersome, but this is where you exercise your discretion and judgment and say, you know what, I think those jobs are similar, even if they not assigned to the same pay. They may not be assigned to the same pay grade because, and in case that you use external market surveys, or you use external valuation as a policy. But you pretty much do break jobs into components, do your job analysis, collect data about the jobs, and decide how close they are. We use the rule of 80%. I mean, if it's 80% overlap, they're similar.
Thanks, Igor. Melissa, hopefully that helps. We have one here from Anonymous. How can you measure quality of experience and other intangibles? Can it be quantified in ways other than evaluation of work?
Yeah, again, the talent of human resources practitioner. What we would do is we would look at where they worked. Was it the same scope? Was it the same organizational environment? Was it the same level of decision making, and so on and so forth? It is subjective, but this is why HR practitioners are exempt employees, because we have to exercise discretion and judgment making those decisions. Some of them are easy to track, and some of them we just have to go deeper and understand. So, and it depends on the job classification too. For finance, for example, they're all size sensitive. The higher the especially for management and finance, the higher the revenue size or operating budget size, the more complex the job is. Same for human resources. If you were director of organization that has 7 employees, you're really generalist. So you can evaluate those experience by thinking about this breaking it down like this. That does not, of course, answer I think you had dual question. You had question about evaluating performance. That's something that, is very difficult until you see how they perform in your environment. It's very difficult to measure the past.
Thank you, Igor. That concludes our questions. We do have a few more minutes. I'm going to give a last call before we log off here. So any last minute questions, feel free to ask them. Give it a few more seconds. All right, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Igor. We will see you all in August. Everyone have a great rest of your July, great rest of your week, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.